All right. So if you remember, they're trying to go through various biblical passages to prove that you're supposed to feed your workers. First, we established the principle of you feed the workers with the crops that they pick. And I'm not even going to go through all the details there, other than to remind you it's the harvest workers that are allowed to basically eat whatever they want, but they aren't allowed to put it into a bucket. That actually comes from the Torah. But we want to prove that from the Torah. So we have the law in the Mishnah, then we want to prove it from the Torah. And the problem is the Torah seems to be talking not just about workers, but anybody that walks through a field. So the Torah seems to say anybody that walks through your field can take whatever they want, and just as long as they don't have a bucket. And for the rabbis, it's important that it's not anybody that walks through the field. It's actually just the workers who are working on your field are allowed to eat anything they want. So they're struggling to prove this because every time they come up with something from Scripture, from the Bible, a particular crop, they try to extrapolate to every other crop. And the problem is that they always find one element in that crop which doesn't transfer to other crops. So you remember they tried grapes, and grapes aren't like every other crop, and they tried standing grain, and they tried olives, and they were able to prove for those particular crops, but they weren't able to prove for every single crop until, now we said this last time, but we'll start with this on page 173. Verse 7, El Amar Shmuel, so Shmuel says, Amar Krav Chermesh. So Shmuel says, no, well, Scripture says sickle. The word Chermesh is a sickle, a harvesting tool. So the fact that it says if you go through a field with a sickle, every crop is picked with a sickle. So a sickle is a stand-in for every crop. And that's how we know that it's for every harvest, every crop, you have to allow your workers. And by the way, that's also how they get the idea that it only applies to workers, because your average person is not going to be walking through your field, cutting through your field on the way to shul, on the way to the supermarket, for whatever reason going through your field, and having a sickle in his pocket, her pocket. But a worker is going to have a sickle, so that's how we know, the rabbis say. Of course, a smart guy is going to bring a sickle with him if he understands he's going to be going through somebody's field. But they're using the word sickle there really for two things. One is to say this applies to all crops, but also to say it's for workers, because workers are the ones that have the sickle. L'rabot kol ba'alei charmesh. So Shmuel says, and that includes anything that uses a sickle, any kind of crop. Okay? And that seems to be the end, except, of course, it's not at all, for various reasons. I'll tell you, one is common sense that we'll get to. What's the common sense? How is it that sickle, in your own mind, would not work? You would not be able to extrapolate from the word sickle to every crop.
Fruit trees.
Yes, because there are crops that you don't use a sickle. So don't think that that's not going to come up. Right. Okay, anyhow. But there's a more serious problem here. I say more serious because I don't really understand it. But it's an exegetical issue, which we'll go through quickly. V'hai chermesh mi ba'ilei. But we need the word sickle. So we need the word sickle to prove something else. And this is one of their principles, is you can't use the same word to prove multiple laws in the Talmud. It's one of the Talmud's rules. To prove this, bishat chermesh echol, shalo bishat chermesh lo tuchol. So we need the word sickle to prove the following principle, that you're only allowed to eat it during the time when you're using the sickle. In other words, during the time of the harvest, which we talked about before. In other words, if you're a weeder in the field, your job is to weed. Your job actually isn't to harvest or to pick, or even to plant, when you're not using the sickle. Or, your job is to store and to load and to sort. Then you're not allowed to eat whatever you want. The only people and the only time you're allowed to eat whatever you want, and I said before, you will soon get sick of eating that. It's actually not that big a financial loss to the owner. The only time you're allowed to do it is during the harvest. So you need the word sickle there to show us that it's only during the time of the harvest, which we've defined already. I'm not going to go through that again. It's only during the time of the harvest that you're allowed to eat. Without the word sickle, we wouldn't know that, and therefore you can't use it also to prove all crops. Okay? Except you can, so turn the page.
Is sickle used in the Torah?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a quote. It's a quote from the Torah. Okay. Page 174. So we can teach that it's only during the time of the harvest from this phrase. This is from the Torah, quoting the Torah 174. Hahu mi. No, we can learn that from El kelyecha lo titain. Now, we learn it from the injunction that you can't put it in a bucket to take home. The only reason you would put something in a bucket would be during time of harvest. So the fact that you have that verse, put it in a bucket, teaches us that all this applies, this generosity allowing the worker to eat, only takes place during the time of harvest. That liberates the word sickle to be able to teach us something else entirely. Okay? How's that? Any questions? All right.
So they can only eat while they're working.
Only eat while they're working, and also during this. It's both. It's while they're working, and it's also the season of the harvest. Yeah. And it's also limited to people who work on the harvest too. Like this doesn't work for the people who weed or who sort, or it could be different people. Yeah.
We finished with sickle, or we're going to keep talking about sickle?
We're not quite finished with sickle yet.
Because I have a pivot question on the word sickle. Does the Malach HaMavet use a sickle?
The angel of death.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there are
Paintings.
yeah, there are paintings of them. Yeah, I don't know if those are Jewish paintings or not. I don't know if the source is Jewish.
He used a scythe.
Yeah.
Scythe. Yeah. It is interesting. The image is like he's harvesting, right?
Or it has implications.
Or she, right? Yeah, yes, is harvesting, right? Yeah, yeah. Apparently a sickle. Is there a big difference between a sickle and a scythe? I'm not actually a. Oh, scythe. Okay, yeah. Apparently these are some of the oldest tools people have ever found, and it's not just one of the oldest tools. It's the oldest tool that's still in use, that people still use them.
It's amazing.
Yeah, whoever invented the sickle was really onto something. Right? You should have.
Maybe a millionaire by now.
Right, much more of a millionaire. It was much more than an iPhone. Do you think they'll be using iPhones like 3,000 years from now?
No.
But they'll still be using sickles, right? Probably.
They'll use automatic.
Yeah.
Automatic sickle.
Well, we have automatic sickles, but you know, sometimes it's easier just to. All right. Anyway, enough. Page 174, number 2. Tenach devar chermesh. Here we go. Delav bar chamash monalan. Okay, we've learned about crops where you use a sickle. Bar chamesh, it means the crops that you can use a sickle. What about crops where you wouldn't use a sickle? And the outstanding example of that, Irv already mentioned, is fruit trees. There's other crops too where I imagine you wouldn't use a sickle, but fruit trees for sure you wouldn't use a sickle. Okay, so how do we know, about pears? Or I'm not going to say apples because someone always corrects me. They didn't have apples.
Or tomatoes.
Yeah, right, tomatoes. So, but they had apricots, and so anyway. I'm gonna keep going. Ella Mar Rabbi Yitzchak Amar Kra. It's gonna sound circular, but it says Amar Kra. Scripture says Kama. So now we go back to standing grain. But the thing is, we'd already eliminated standing grain because you can't extrapolate from standing grain because standing grain has the peculiar requirement of challah. The challah is where you give a portion of it to the priest, and that's not true with every crop. Every crop you have to tithe. But in addition to tithing, if you have grain, you have to give an additional offering. Now the word kama, and here's where we're going to have a response too. So kama, which they're referring to as standing grain because it's got the Hebrew word kam, which means to stand. But you'll see they're also implying that, well, they will imply that kama can refer to fruit trees because they also stand up. So it could mean that kama, and if they also stand up, then you can extrapolate from kama to kama. The kama more broadly means any crop that's standing up.
But in one case, it's the crop itself that you use
that
stands up.
Yeah.
Whereas with a tree, you don't chop the tree to eat it. So
right, yeah. Anyway, let's keep going. Little about kol bale kama. So you've got the word kama, which includes everything that is standing. Okay. V'hamart kama kamad mechayve b'chala. Okay, but we already decided that we're not going to use kama, because kama's got the peculiarity of requiring that extra challah, which we still do when we bake challah, right? Some people still do it. You put a little piece into the oven and burn it up. That only is a memory of what used to be a very serious contribution you had to make to the priest, part of your crops. Okay. But this is hani mali mekame deneche chermesh. Okay. But we had said that before we had the derivation of sickle. In other words, what they're saying is to learn every crop, we have a series of exegetical principles that allow us to extrapolate beyond one crop to another. And we're not only going to use one, we're going to use the whole teaching of the sickle, which includes lots of crops. We're using the case of grapes. We're using the case of standing grain. We're also going to consider trees to be standing, despite the fact there's objections against that. Taken together, all of these, which this is unusual in the Talmud, by the way, but they're saying taken together, all of these different derivations allow us to apply this rule to every crop. Hashta da'ate chermesh. Now that we've had this teaching about sickle, each Rabbi le kol davar chamesh, where we can extrapolate to everything using a sickle. Va'afal gav delo michaye b'chala. Even though all those things that require a sickle you're not obligated to give the chala contribution. Kama lamili. So at that point, what good is the word kama? Lirabot kol ba'alei kama. At that point, kama, the word standing, can apply to everything that is standing, even if you're not offering some kind of special challah offering. Okay. And one more thing. Fahashta nafkilan mecharmesh umi kama ki tavo bekerem reyecha lameli. Okay, so we've actually satisfactorily proved what we set out to prove, which is that you have to give this stuff to your workers, and from all sorts of different ways to do it. But we proved it. Now we're going to go on. We're going to do one more. Well, we're going to move on a little bit. The question is, why do we need to even prove it? Because we have this verse, verse 3, Ki tavo bekerem re'echa. So I'm sorry. Since we've learned from these principles that you have to feed your worker what they grow, why do we even need the verse Ki tavo bekerem re'echa? The Torah has, when you come into the vineyard of your fellow, you can take whatever you want. And here it's not referring to they say it's not referring to anybody that's going through a vineyard. It's referring to a worker. So why do we need that again? We learned from other ways that you have to feed your worker. So why do we have this particular phrase that says you have to feed your worker grapes? Because you'd be able to extrapolate from everything else. All right, is the question clear? Okay. So it's gonna take us into some uncomfortable territory. But if everybody promises not to say anything, we'll be okay, and then not watch the video. And I'm kidding. So Amar Rava says Lihilchotav Kidditanya. Okay, so Rava says because we need that verse, and here we're actually going to get a good example of how they analyze a verse word for word and find significant meaning and actually interesting legal halachic meaning in every word in the verse. Okay, Ki tavo. When you enter, Nemar kan bi'ah, v'nemar lahalan, lo tavo alav hashemesh. All right, so it has the word tavo. We're just looking at the word tavo, which means when you enter, when you come in. We had the word enter again in this verse, lo tavo alav hashemesh. So that verse, it means don't allow the sun to set. The context of that verse is you have to pay the worker that day. You can't allow the sun to set on the day before you pay your worker. So it's interesting they take a verse which also refers to employee rights, and that, by the way, is the whole topic of this discussion, right? It's employee rights, that employees have the right to eat as much as they want of the harvest while they're harvesting. So now we quote another verse that says that you have to pay your employee that day. You know, and it's not a weekly check, it's not a monthly check. You pay him for that work that day, and the context here, of course, is living hand to mouth, but also just fairness. Did a day of work, you pay him for the day of work. Okay, that's quoted a lot in the Torah. Anyway, so that's what Malahalan bifoel. Just as what I just quoted is certainly about a worker. So you have to pay the worker. Hakatub medaber afkan bifoel hakatub medaber. So also here meaning the person that's walking through the vineyard. So here it's actually telling us you may think the guy walking through the vineyard is anybody that walks through a vineyard. He's allowed to take grapes. Now we have the proof that no, it's only referring to workers because of one particular word. The word is tavo. What entering into the word entering is used in one case clearly a worker. So now when we see it in the other case, it must also be for a worker, which removes the radical generosity from the verse, which is that anybody can take whatever they want if they're walking through your field, and applies it directly to the worker. Okay? I'm going to keep going because I want to get to this. Bekerem re'echa. Okay, so this applies when you're working in the vineyard of re'echa. So re'echa should be a familiar people that daven, right? Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, they love your neighbor. Okay, reacha implies some kind of intimacy, some kind of closeness. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. V'lo b'kerem nochri. Says this doesn't apply for the vineyard of a non-Jew. So now they're suggesting that the whole setup here, which we talked about before, this generosity that you have to feed your workers, and also, by the way, pay them that day, only applies to Jews. And that's why I said don't tell anybody. So there is this sort of tradition here, and they're playing around with it. They don't come to that in the end as a conclusion, but they're suggesting that's a possibility, that this whole system only applies to Jews. So if you've got a Jewish owner, non-Jewish owner or a non-Jewish worker, if you've got a non-Jewish worker, you may not be obligated. This is something that only works in the community. Let me.
The re'echa means only Jewish friend?
Well, no, re'echa means some kind of close relationship, some kind of intimacy, and so it's a leap. Yeah, it's a leap to say re'echa is Jew, nochri is non-Jew, but they're taking that leap. They're taking that leap. So they're closing the circle and saying this is how we work among Jews. Now, you have evidence of this in the Bible too, where in effect the Bible outlaws slavery for fellow Hebrews, for fellow Jews, but allows it for non-Jews. I'm actually studying that with a bar mitzvah kid this week. The bar mitzvah is a long time off, but we started reading the Haftorah, and it's a passage in Jeremiah, where Jeremiah is blasting the Israelites for saying, you promised that you wouldn't keep your fellow Jews as slaves, and here you're keeping your fellow Jews as slaves. And Jeremiah actually says, hey, look, there's non-Jews out there, just use them. And Jeremiah is this great moral authority, and it's disappointing that's his ethics. And of course the sensitive 13-year-old immediately asks, hey, because his culture you wouldn't make those divisions. Now in Jeremiah's culture you would. Yeah, I mean, Jeremiah is unapologetic about it. We're trying to build our own sacred Jewish community, and we're not as concerned with universal principles. Jeremiah's got some universal principles, but he's more concerned with our particularism, our tribe, and setting decent values within our tribe. And the same thing. So the Talmud too here is. By the way, it's not the entire Talmud. It's a suggestion. Maybe this only applies to Jews, to Israel, and maybe it doesn't apply to non-Jews. The whole system. It gets even a little more shocking. Let's see if we have time. How about if I go on and then I can take some comments. I want to get to Hanichan. Okay. So he says that would work. The idea that this whole thing only applies to Jews, Jewish employers, Jewish employees. Hanicha laman damar gezel nochri asur. Okay, so that works for those people that say it's forbidden to steal from non-Jews. Hainu de'itz tarich kra l'meish refoel. In that case, you would need this extra scripture to allow workers to eat. You probably know where we're going here. Page 176. Ella, but rather, leman damar gezel nochri mutar, hashta gzela mutar poel mibai. Okay, but there are those of us that say that to steal from a non-Jew is allowed. So in other words, there's two opinions here. They're alluding to two opinions, directly alluding to two opinions. One is that it's forbidden to steal from non-Jews, and the other is that it's permitted to steal from non-Jews. I'll read this again. Gezel nochri mutar. So there is a body of opinion in the Talmud. Now, Steinsaltz is going to be very quick to say, that's not the law. That's not Jewish law. He doesn't spend a lot of time analyzing it because, like a lot of us, he's embarrassed by it. But there is this principle in the Talmud. It doesn't turn out to be the majority principle. It doesn't make its way into Jewish law, but there's a live principle in the Talmud that gezel nochri mutar, that you are permitted to steal from non-Jews. And maybe we'll save till next week. We'll unpack the exegetics here, but I want to talk about this for a second because we shouldn't be naive. I mean, I occasionally, because since I read halachic writings, here and in Israel, and that's occasionally brought up. It's occasionally brought up that, hey, wait a second, there are people that think gezel nochri mutar, that you're allowed to steal from non-Jews. So certain things, certain little shady scales or something, which would certainly be impermissible to our fellow Jews, may be allowed. And and there's others, that are like myself, like all of us here, I think are embarrassed by that. Don't know quite what to do with it. But there you have it. Yeah.
Can we extrapolate from that so that the concept that if a non-Jew dies, a Kohen can go into a cemetery?
Well, I think it's case by case. I mean, so when have you read that before? I've never heard that. Have you heard that?
I got that from an older Kohen.
Oh, okay, so that could very well be true. I don't know. So the what he's talking about is that in general, a Kohen is not allowed to go into a cemetery, because a Kohen is not supposed to be in proximity to a dead body to keep bodily purity. And so the suggestion is, what if it's a non-Jewish cemetery? Because it's only dead Jews that can confer the, that confer the impurity, but dead non-Jews don't matter in some way. I mean, I don't know whether those things are really comparable. First of all, I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't actually. I mean, I can imagine it might be. It seems unlikely, but I can imagine it might be. But I'm not sure it's the same principle. It's certainly very crude in this context to say, hey, you're allowed to steal from non-Jews. I mean, you have it in the Ten Commandments, it's just hard, which very much seem to be universal principles. So, and yet, I mean, we shouldn't be naive. I mean, every culture is vulnerable to this kind of chauvinism, and the Talmud is a cultural document, and they fight it out. I suppose we should take comfort in the fact that it's not the winning argument. In the end, it's not permitted to steal from non-Jews, but I mean, here's where we shouldn't be naive. I've been acquainted with Jews over the years that have felt that it was permitted, and I've read writings of respected rabbis who have said it. I mean, by respected, I mean learned. I don't mean very nice people.
But if we extend that philosophy, if you say that, I mean, to me, the Ten Commandments were always, universal for applying to anyone. But if you accept that premise, or those who accept that premise, then can extrapolate to say you can murder non-Jews.
Where does it stop? Yeah.
And you can take the wives of non-Jews.
Right.
That doesn't.
Where's the original source of you can steal?
I don't know. I'll look at that. It's not in the Torah.
It's not in the Torah.
So in the Torah, you do have some troubling distinctions. For instance, lending and interest. So lending and interest which was of course a huge area of tension in the Middle Ages between Jews and non-Jews for exactly this reason. So in the Torah it says explicitly you can't lend an interest to Jews, and then it says explicitly that's why you have, it doesn't say quite like this, but that's why you have non-Jews. Lend an interest to them. Lenochri tigosh. So lend an interest to the non-Jew. And the word tigosh actually is a stronger word that it means there's a kind of oppression in lending an interest, so you can oppress the non-Jew, but don't do it to the Jew. So, and you have some of those distinctions in the Bible itself. Now, the idea that you can steal from non-Jews, I don't think there's a biblical verse. So it comes in through the Talmud. I'm sure it's not a Mishnah. So I guess I'd have to look that up. I don't really know the origin of it. It may be here. I'm not sure.
To me, it seems like there was no way of enforcing these guidelines with non-Jews, so that's why he specified the Jews, because you really couldn't control the Romans or the Greeks or any non-Jews as to what they can do and what they can't do. So they specified that, and I don't think it really was, if they could have applied it to universally, they would, but they couldn't. There's no way of them enforcing it.
Yeah. I mean, that's a nice sort of broad sociological explanation for it. It leads to real ethical compromise, though, in the end. I mean, in the end, you've always got that, well, he's just a non-Jew. So I can.
Non-Jew lives next door to you.
Right. I mean, yes, exactly. So once you have, and by the way, by the time you get to the Talmud, you already have that. You have Jews and non-Jews living in pretty close proximity. Now, in the Mishnah, maybe not as much, but it's a 1, 2,
So the first thing that comes to mind is why would those who advocate this support stealing from non-Jews? So the idea of not doing it to other Jews is like professional courtesy. They're part of your tribe. So it doesn't mean that in this interpretation stealing is not wrong, but you're not going to do it within your. An interest is not wrong, but you're not going to do it within your tribe because of professional courtesy, whatever you want to call it. And then I'm trying to wrap my head around what's good about stealing and how does that work, because it's got to give some good to do it.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, well, maybe if the other non-Jews will steal from you, allowing to steal back is okay, or maybe it's for the if it's for the benefit of the Jews, not personal benefit, you could argue stealing is okay. So I'm wondering, do you know any of the arguments of, not just you can steal, but there's got to be a higher purpose for it.
Okay. So first of all, we'd have to spend some time thinking about the word gezel. There's words for steal, several words for steal. The Ten Commandments has tignov, which means steal, but gezel is a different kind of steal. The Talmud does spend time on those. It does have different ways of interpreting. And there's embezzlement, there's violent crime, there's nonviolent crime, and I'm not familiar with all those off the top of my head. I've studied those years ago. There is an interesting footnote on the whole thing on page 176, where it says robbing a non-Jew. This is pretty much the only thing that Steinsaltz says, but it's pretty complete. Maybe this speaks to Don's point. But it's elsewhere, so there's other places this comes up, and since the Talmud, it's very difficult to date individual phrases in the Talmud. This is one of the sources of this of the whole idea, along with two others, Baba Kama, Baba Metzia. The Gemara discusses the issue of whether a Jew is permitted to rob a non-Jew. The halacha is in accordance with the opinion that robbing a non-Jew is prohibited. Okay, well, that's relief. The idea that they have to debate it is certainly disappointing, but they debate lots of things. But I can tell you that it's still a live option for certain people. So I guess what I would encourage you to do is just read that whole thing, and maybe next week we'll start with that. Okay, thanks.
Next line is interesting.